Hello everybody, welcome back to BareRose Garage. What are we going to talk about today? Well, let's talk about my favorite things that are standing right behind me. Power. Cheap and affordable power out of your internal combustion engine. So, here we go. I got two shining examples right here with me. This little guy and this little guy. Now, why do I choose this one right here? Because it was the last. This is the end of the era. This is a little 1954 239 Y-block Ford. This one over here is a 1971 385 series big block Ford. This was the last, or I guess you could say the beginning of the end of horsepower years. Now, what do these two have in common of each other? Because they're the exact same thing. They all fell victim to this guy right here. This was the holdback of it all. This is what happened. So here we go. Here, I'll explain it to you. Now, to start this story off, we have to jump clear back to the beginning. Exactly, way before this guy even. Now, the secret to getting horsepower out of an internal combustion engine, naturally aspirated, the keys to the kingdom is compression. The more compression you can get out of your engine, the more horsepower and torque you can get out of them. The sky is the limit, almost, within, reasonable means. But that is the key to it all, compression. So what happened, and why did it take so long to get to the compression? Well, it all goes to the gasoline. Prior to 1955, we had no idea what kind of fuel we were getting. The fuel was horrible. I know people will say all the time, well, it was dirt cheap back then, oh, blah, blah, blah. No, it was actually pretty expensive back in the day, and it was horrible because octane ratings were null and void. You had no idea what kind of octane you were getting. So, to combat that, manufacturers like Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, everybody, Studebaker, Hudson, all of the independents, every car manufacturer played it safe. They played it very safe. And the reason they had to play it safe is because you had no idea what kind of fuel you were getting to put into your car. And they didn't want a lot of warranty work. And they wanted their cars dependable. So the way that they got around that was 6-to-1 compression. Yeah, that's about what this little guy right here has got. And the reason for that, well, like I said, we got to go way back here when gasoline was first introduced and the internal combustion engine started to take off. Well, they figured out that how to stabilize the fuel and get it to burn and not explode is they would take a little itty bitty little molecule of oil, of alcohol, add it to the oil during the refining process, and that alcohol would stabilize the fuel and make it burn. So octane rating, or octane in general, was born. The problem was, though, that little alcohol evaporated, and it evaporated quickly. And as it evaporates, it becomes it collects water. You'll hear, even to this day, people refer to alcohol as water. Yeah, that ethanol fuel, it's like running water in there. Because that's what it's doing. As it's evaporating, it's sucking the water out of the air, the humidity in the air that we breathe and everything. So as it's evaporating out, and it evaporates quickly, it sucks water. And yeah, bad things happen. Well, in 1921, a GM engineer figured out that if you took one little molecule of lead and attached it to the alcohol, the lead would stabilize the alcohol, and the alcohol would stabilize the octane. So the keys were open. Now we were able to at least stabilize it. The reason that they did it was not for cars. It wasn't for this. It was actually done for airplanes. Why? Because airplanes operate at a very high altitude, the air is very thin, and well, let's face it, when your car throws a piston out the side of the block, all you got to do is just weasel your way over onto the side of the road, and everything, well, it's a bad day for the wallet, but yeah, bad things really don't happen too often. When an airplane does that, bad things happen. Really, really bad things happen. So it started in the aviation industry, and they started adding this to the gasoline to boost the octane levels, because airplanes are flying around at high altitude. They need a lot of octane level to keep the fuel nice and stable. Now, what does octane actually do? I'll break it down very simple for you, and also explain what those little numbers and words on the gas pump are all about. Octane is what keeps fuel, the gasoline, from exploding. It makes it stable under compression to burn. Now, I know everybody watches these YouTube videos, and you can see so many of them, and oh, they make my toes curl every time I hear this. You'll see guys on here say, okay, when they're explaining the internal combustion engine, when this piston comes up in its compression stroke and your spark plug ignites, goes off, everybody says, and it explodes and drives that piston down. Stop. That's bad. That's really, really bad. You do not want it exploding. When it explodes, you get what's called ping, or as I've referred to it in many of my other videos, we need to strike that word from the English language and call it what it is: detonation. That's the fuel exploding, and you do not want that. What the ping is that's your piston slapping the side of the cylinder. It's that piston is trying to come out the side of the block or down through the oil pan, and if it continues, it will, and then a bad day happens for everybody. So, how did they combat that? Well, they figured out that if they took that alcohol molecule and added a little pinch of lead to it, the lead stabilized the alcohol stabilized the fuel, and made it possible to burn evenly across the board inside of an internal combustion engine. Now, it took a long time though. Like I said, a General Motors engineer figured out in 1921, but it took all the way till 1955 before it actually was implemented across the board at every gas station. Prior to that, you had no idea what kind of fuel you were getting. So the possibility of detonation occurring and blowing your engine up was pretty high prior to 1955. So all the automotive companies, they relied on low compression in order to save themselves from a whole lot of warranty work. I mean, every company out there would have went bankrupt real quick if they would have started putting a lot of compression to get horsepower out of them. Now, fun little fact in all of this, Chrysler took a different approach. Chrysler wasn't quite sure if all of this was going to catch on, so they relied on flow. Now, I know everybody hears about that. What is an internal combustion engine? Well, it's basically an air pump, right? You've heard that time and time again. The more air you can get in and out, and the faster you can do it, the more power you get. So Chrysler went the other way. They considered it the safe route. They relied on flow numbers. So they built this hemispherical head, low compression engine that breathed better than anything on the market. And to this day, it is still the best flowing heads in the world. The Hemi was born. That was Chrysler's answer to this uneven, weird ground back in 1955 that everybody was floating around with, and well, the Hemi was born. Actually, the Hemi wasn't. Chrysler did not call it a Hemi. They called it the dual rocker. It's because it had two rocker shafts that run down the head like this. Had one on this, one on here, and the spark plug went right in the center. Well, that's pretty easy, right? So those valves kind of went in this way. And as it did that, the intake was able to go right in and the fuel went straight out. Perfect design for flow. But it had this big open chamber. So the first gen Hemi had no compression. I mean, it had very low compression. But because it flowed so good, they didn't do too bad on horsepower. Other manufacturers, well, Chevy was the first in '55 with the 265 to really push. Ford did it with the Mel series. They figured that a luxury line wasn't going to be used too much. They started bouncing the compression ratios up because fuel became standardized and the octane levels across the board at any gas station you went to, you knew what kind of octane you were getting, and the octane levels were getting higher and higher and higher because of that little bit of lead that we put in with the alcohol that stabilized the alcohol, and the alcohol stabilized the fuel and octane. So 55 onward, you seen octane levels at 115. Now, what does the octane do? As more compression is in there, it keeps it from pre-detonating. So you could run a lot of timing in it and still keep it alive with, good Lord, we seen in 1959, the 430 male, oh, good Lord, I'm going way back here. The 430 male had 12-to-1 compression factory in a max wedge designed head. Yeah, that engineer actually went off and worked for Chrysler. That's where your guys' max wedge comes in. But anyway, Ford went all out on the luxury line. The little bitty Y block that was in there, every bit, you know, the Ford instead of Mercury Lincoln, the Ford got the leftovers and they played it safe with these guys until later on with the 312, 272, 272, 292, 312. They played it a little bit safe. They slowly started to increase compression on it, but the Y block right there, it did okay in those years. They suffered from flow issues. But as I have said in other of my videos, this engine is actually designed for boost. It's designed to run the Paxton supercharger along with it because that's the other way to get horsepower, but that's not naturally aspirated, which is where the Hemi really shines because it's a low compression. But we'll get into that later. The secret to all of this was compression. In 1955, after the fuel was finally stabilized and octane levels came up, we were able to increase compression. Or I shouldn't say we, the manufacturers, Ford, GM, Chrysler, well, not Chrysler kind of still floated on the Hemi. Studebaker, all of them, every manufacturer out there started to jump their compression ratios up. All the way up from 6.5, which is all this sucker's got, 14-to-1, bone stock from the factory. Okay, so that is the easy explanation of what happened in 1955 all the way to this guy, 1971, actually 1970. In 1970, they figured out that maybe all this lead in this gasoline isn't a good idea because as it would burn, it would go out and it would form a carbon cloud, or as they started to call it, wasn't quite fog, you know, it was kind of man-made. Yeah, you could call it man-made fog. They called it smog, a combination of smoke, exhaust, and fog. And it would all, because the lead was burnt and separated, the alcohol was able to grab a hold of the carbons, and yeah, it created smog. And it was bad. It was really, really bad. You look at the old pictures of Los Angeles back in the 60s, yeah, lead was actually a bad idea. But they didn't know that we were going to be using these things in the kind of quantity that we were using them. That was another thing that happened in 1955, is we changed from a single car family to a multiple car family. By the time the 60s rolled around, you had a car, your wife had a car, it was Oprah time, your son had a car, your daughter had a car, everybody had a car. And, well, prior to 1955, everything was pretty much a single car family. And we moved out across the country. You know, people were moving out of the cities and into the suburbs, and people were actually driving more because these things are kind of fun. And it's a freedom to just jump in your car, hit the key, and drive wherever you want to go. In fact, you don't have to drive the wife to the market anymore because she has her own car that she can do that. And little Junior doesn't have to borrow the keys no more because he can buy one of these used old jalopies and he can hit the road and go do whatever he wants to do. The world was open. We became a multiple car family, and there was a lot of cars on the road producing this smog. The problem with the smog, though, like I said, it's pretty bad. It was causing all kinds of bad things. Acid rain, I'm not an environmentalist, but yeah, the lead had to go. It was time to get the lead out. Which brings us back over here to this, and we entered the smog years. The reason was is they took the lead molecule out and launched us right back into pre-1955. Now, the auto manufacturers were scared to death of this. Ford took it first. They were the first ones to jump on the smog years, if you will, 1971. The way that they did it was they retarded the timing way down and started to put Chicago-style pizza pistons in it. By that, I mean deep dish pistons. In other words, they dropped the compression ratio. We went from 14 to 1 down to 8.5 to 1, and even less. It wasn't uncommon in the latter 70s to find 8 to 1 compression, 7.5 to 1 compression, and that was the reason for it. Auto manufacturers weren't sure how they were going to stabilize the fuel, so to keep themselves from having to do a whole lot of warranty work, they started to drop the compression. Now, the government, through the 70s, they gave a big window, a 10-year window as a matter of fact. They figured by that time, all of the warranty would be, all the cars would be out of warranty by the time that they went totally unleaded. I know through the 80s, there was a time when you could get regular or unleaded. And you've seen the cars come out that had the little that said unleaded only. As they were figuring out how to get the alcohol to stabilize in the cars. And it had everything to do about standard gasoline that everybody is getting and how the manufacturers could avoid a whole lot of warranty work when them octane levels shot to the floor. And you see it now when you go to the gas station and you see it's really hard to get anything 90 and above octane levels. Why? Because they're using straight ethanol again, just like they were doing way back pre-55. And you're seeing compression ratios drop. Now, what is it about the octane levels on the gas pump? You'll notice on every every time you go up to get gas from the gas station, there's always little buttons up there. And there's some little words that go across there. Now, you've heard a lot of people say, what do those words mean? And they're exactly right. The words mean nothing. Actually, marketing. There's a reason that those words are up here, the price is right underneath, and then the numbers are way down here on the buttons themselves. The reason for that is the wording, regular, mid-grade, premium. That's all about marketing. They're trying to get you to buy the expensive stuff. You're exactly right. But when your eyeballs go down to the octane ratings, that is extremely important. And it has to do with what kind of compression ratio you're running in your car. You have to match those numbers to what you've got here. Prime example is my wife's little Ford Edge. It's a new car, but because it's got the turbo on it and everything, it requires 90 and above octane. Says it right on the little fill cap when you open the fuel door. It says 90 and above. If you do put mid-grade or regular in it, well, the computer can kind of handle it, but you get no mileage out of it. It cuts the mileage almost in half. Now, the way it handles it is on a modern engine, they got little NOx sensors down here on the cylinders and a wire that comes up and goes to the ECU. What those NOx sensors are is basically a vibration sensor. When it gets an unusual shock, vibration down there, it says, whoa, we got detonation. So it sends a signal up to the ECU that says, hey, take some timing out. So it automatically retards out the timing, adds more fuel, leans the fuel out, whatever it's got to do to prevent knock or detonation, because the octane level that you're running isn't what it needs to be in that particular situation. Also, as you're driving across country and you go and you change altitudes drastically, it's keeping it out of detonation and keeping your timing perfect for the octane levels that you're running. But if you're running higher compression because of the turbo and everything, you know, there's a lot to it. It'll retard out the timing to where you got no horsepower, so you got to push on the gas farther in order to maintain the speed you normally would be maintaining with a higher octane. Because if it's got the higher octane, it's not detonating down below, sending those signals to retard out your timing. It's keeping it running efficiently. That's a good way to say it. If you run the proper octane in a modern engine, because it's able to put in the timing that it needs, the fuel ratio that it needs for the compression and the forced induction that you're adding to it. So you don't have to push the gas pedal down quite so far. Instead of riding here, you're riding here. And the farther you push the gas down, pedal down, the more fuel you're going to use. You see what I mean? So on a modern car, it's able to do that instantaneously through the electronics and the little sensors and everything like that to keep your engine tuned, fine-tuned for whatever situation that's happening. So, does lower octane work in these high compression engines? Well, kinda. If you take all the timing out, take all the horsepower out of it, and it'll run. It won't detonate, it won't ping, but you're getting no horsepower out of it. That's why this 385 series 460 big block in 1987 only had a horsepower rating of 215. That was it. 215 horsepower. Why? Because it had big deep dish pistons, big open chambered heads, and I think those are set like 12 degrees retarded. So when you put it top dead center, everything, you're actually, it's done from the timing chain. It's actually way retarded from the factory and set that way so you won't mess it up. It had nothing to do with mileage. That's why in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, cars got horrible mileage, downright horrid mileage. It was because they took all the timing out of them, and because they didn't have the computer to lightning fast tune it. They took all the timing out of it, they took all the compression out of it, and they just run like total dogs, straight from the factory, brand new, out of the box. So I hope that explains a little bit about where the evolution of horsepower came from, why it came, and then why it went away. Now, if you're looking for good, cheap horsepower, it's not hard to find. You can find it in stock form that is actually easy to repair, rebuild, and it's cheap because it's all stock. All you got to do is look for anything built between 1955 and, well, with Ford, 1971. If you catch anything in those years, and the closer you get to 1971, the more horsepower you got. A prime example of all of this is that 1968 Mercury I got out there with the 390 in it. That thing's got 12.5 to 1 compression, bone stock, with the S, the special application intake on it. What is the special application intake? It's basically an abrupt performer made out of cast iron. All of that bone stock. That car out there, I think it's 350 horsepower is what they rated it at, but independent dyno people have actually dynoed those FEs way higher than that. It was because of the compression, but that car was designed to run on 105 octane. That's hard to find now, so I had to play it safe with it. I backed the timing off from factory on it, and I run premium 93 octane in it now. That's the secret to horsepower and finding it on the cheap is don't be afraid to look for cars that are close to 1970. That's when the peak of the wave hit. And then the government, the EPA, stepped in and said, we got to take the lead out, and they plummeted because they had to play it safe to keep from doing an enormous amount of warranty work. But if you play your cards right and you know what you're looking for, you can take a 1980s block, just a basic block, combine it with late 60s internals, and have yourself some cheap horsepower that won't break the bank, and it will help you get out there and keep that metal hot, where we can keep these old girls on the road where they belong. We'll catch you on the next one.